it's okay.
Well, how do you usually introduce yourself? Who are you and what do you do?
Uh, well, I usually introduce myself. I am a San Francisco-based blogger, and I am a Presbyterian minister, and I have found myself in a peculiar place of being able to blog and comment on a variety of things around faith and politics and race and parenting. Um, I do a lot of speaking and writing.
Fantastic. Well, you've been blogging for many, many years. How did you get started?
Well, I don't know if you remember. I think you helped me get started, actually. I think a long time ago. I think I first started and actually asked you where I should go and what I should do. And I don't even remember how we connected. But I think you helped me get started, and I've always had a lot of opinions about a great many things, and I've always liked to create space where people can engage in healthy ways. And I've been committed to that throughout my ministry in person and online. And I think blogging is a natural convergence of all of those things. And so I've always it's been it's fed my soul, and I hope has helped others as well.
Now, where do you find the time and energy to keep blogging? Because that's one of the biggest hurdle that people say why they
Yeah,
don't
well,
blog or why they don't use social media.
yeah, because I don't have a real job. I think I keep telling people, my pastor friends will say to me, how do you have time to do all this? And I have to remind them, it usually happens in the middle of a workshop or a class that I'm teaching on social media or technology, and I remind them that it is kind of my job to keep engaged in these things to a larger extent that they do, so that I can help glean what is important and what's helpful and what isn't helpful. So, it's a discipline. It is a job. It's also a calling for me. So I carve the time out, just as I would in a parish or congregational context. I make sure I use my time well. So it's not as if I'm adding all of this onto a 9 to 5 job. I do see it as part of my whole calling. So it would be different if I was in a congregation. It would be significantly less time and with less frequency, and it would be different for me.
Well, you have been in a congregation, so you launched and pastored a church in San Francisco. You've been part of a denomination, and now you're also an author. So let's step through each of those chapters. What did social media take shape as when you were the lead and solo pastor of a regular size, however large that church was, and how does social media become a facilitator of conversations and relationships?
Well, so the church that I helped to found actually in San Francisco was called Mission Bay Community Church, a church of mostly 20 and 30-year-olds, young, the before hipster really became kind of hipster. That's who they were. And so social media and technology and digital communication, those weren't tactics that we kind of said, oh, we need to use this in order to reach this group. It was kind of, here's what we all use anyway. And so here's how we would naturally communicate. And so that just became part of the DNA and the fabric of how this church grew and communicated and interacted throughout its entire life. And I was there 13 years from the time I was the age of the congregation to the point where I became 10 years older than the congregation, so as we continued to stay young. So we used it because it was the water that everybody breathed, everybody kind of swam in, and the air that they breathed. It wasn't all that everybody used every technology, but there are some undergirding realities around why social media works that informed our worship and our structure and our planning. And so there was consistency between who we were as a faith community, as a cultural body, and then how that manifested itself out in our technology and our use of social media. So yes, we used all of the things that everybody would see, Twitter and Yelp and Facebook and all those things, but it came out of a deep consistency of the culture and our faith and the manifestation of our congregation. So that's really what we did. But I would say one specific thing. I think Yelp, for instance, I would say conservatively 75% of the people who found our congregation in San Francisco came through Yelp. When you hit religious organizations in San Francisco, even today, the number one congregation that comes up is Mission Bay Community Church. Uh, it's not the biggest, it didn't have the most reviews, but it clearly had a demographic review base that helped to kind of perpetuate who we were as a congregation.
Now, fast forward, you became the 219th moderator of the PCUSA, Presbyterian Church of the United States of America denomination, and social media was a big part of both your campaign and also your communication vehicle in this fairly sizable traditional progressive mainline denomination. And that probably ruffled some feather because social media is so open source, instant communication, everything's public and transparent. And yet in many contexts in the church world, things have to be measured and controlled and thought out. What happened?
Yeah, so so I was the moderator of the 218th General Assembly, which just for those who will listen to this and want to catch me on something. I think for me, what people soon learned was that I wasn't nearly as radical or as different or as risky as everybody wanted this young Asian American from San Francisco who uses technology to be. I think that once folks figured out that for me, social media and technology was really just another means of communication, and I wasn't out to use it to destroy what we had been or to become something radically different, but to help the church engage this technology in a way that was actually helpful and faithful and help to share the gospel in the way that we understood it to be shared. It became far less threatening than one might think. There were certainly moments where people felt like a blog, not really quite getting the concept. I was challenged on the blog about it's just about you, and I kind of had to say, well, yeah, it is. I mean, but part of blogging culture and how people see that is they expect that, especially from the office of moderator. And early on, this was before people really started to blog at that level of the denomination. And keep in mind, this is a denomination that is 2 million members, 10,000 congregations, and it's the highest elected office that generally had been reserved for people at the end of their careers. And it was generally older white guys or older white women. And so there were a lot of things that were going to shock people. And I think the blogging was an easy place to go for me in terms of what people wanted to point to. The fact that I didn't always wear a tie was certainly a piece that was important. And then that I was a young Asian American, those were all kind of tied in together. I will say that what it did is it connected people, Presbyterians, more to this church and their denomination than they had ever expected themselves to be connected to. I think what we've seen then and now is that there are Presbyterians who feel an affection towards their denomination and a connection to the denomination that they would have not had. And I think that's one of the elements of my term was just to give people permission to have these two parts of their lives coexist without feeling like they had to hold social media and their church lives separate. And that, I think, has been really exciting. And you've seen it grow in terms after this and continued on.
Well, the magic of editing is I can always go back and splice. So you've been you were one of the youngest and the 218th moderator of a large denomination called the PCUSA, Presbyterian Church of the United States of America.
Correct.
Okay, we'll splice that back in, and we're all good to go. And so you captured much of your learning from your pastoral experience and your denominational experience into an ebook. So tell us about the ebook and what did you want to address through that?
Yeah, so I was asked, a while back, why haven't you written a book about this? And I've always felt that even the best books that come out on social media or blogging are two things usually happen. They're over theoretical so that they don't uh, get out of date too quickly, or they're hyper technical, so they do go out of date very quickly. And so I had always, I think for two reasons, I had shied away because it's so hard to find that medium, and the discipline of writing a book, is just it's a huge discipline. I have great respect for people who have written books. So I was approached by a new publishing company that were going to commit solely to electronic publishing, and um, offered me a great deal in terms of just a contract relationship, and I jived well with the publisher and the people there. It's called Shook Foil Books, and I've had a great experience with them. And they really were committed to ebook only. And so I kind of said, okay, so let's try this out. And so what I've tried to do in the book is to have a good tension between theory and culture and practical kind of application. So I kind of see it as we're flying the plane at 30,000 feet, but we actually land, that we will land the plane. Here are specific things you can do in the church. And hopefully by the time you've walked through the book, you understand why these things work and why they matter and how you can translate that to your particular context. The other reason I wrote the book is because I think that folks often, especially mainline traditional historic churches, either dismiss social media outright because it's this newfangled thing and it's what all the other people do, or we embrace it so much because we think it's the next savior of the church. It's the next process, or 7 steps to kind of model that's going to save the church. And I wanted to blast both of those out of the water and to a certain level. Not going to save the church, but it's also something we have to figure out how we use well. And so that's my hope out of it, and why I felt really called to it. And I had been blogging pieces of this for a long time, and I think it was helpful for me to write long form, not only for this topic, but if I was going to write in the future. So it was a good, healthy risk on my part and by the publishing company, and we think it's going to go well. The other piece that I was excited about was that because it's electronic format, we're going to update it every year. And so we're working on updates for next year. And if you buy it on Amazon, you get those updates free. So you only have to buy one copy, and then you get the updates as they can roll out every year. So we're working on that already to make it better and better every year, to kind of continue to stay up to date.
Oh, that's very cool. So you heard it here first on Social Media Church Podcast that there's going to be an annual update. So we're looking forward to the 2013 edition of the definitive or undefinitive guide.
Definitive-ish guide.
Definitive-ish guide to social media for the church. Awesome. And I forgot my train of thought. But so what kind of response have you gotten to this ebook?
Yeah, we've gotten pretty good response. I think that folks who are eager to both get that theory and praxis have really embraced it. I'll start with one negative. Is the risk we took was possibly the people who need this book the most might not be ready to have it only electronically. And so that is a tension that folks have said, but yeah, the churches that really probably want to use this, or the pastors that really kind of want to sink their teeth into it and are open but not yet convinced, or whatever, need to have it in their hands as a book. And the publisher, I even pushed a little bit on, like, well, what about one version that's paper? And they said, no, we're committed to e-publishing. And so I think that's been one of the critiques, as, gosh, maybe this should be both. The positives, though, have been that it really has given folks an opportunity, from people who are brand new, to see some specific things, as well as those who have been using it for a while, to kind of see some ahas or a few new things. And that's what I'm hoping each year it's going to really reach a breadth of folks that even if you've been doing it a long time, I will hopefully have some new technologies and platforms in there that folks who love to early adopt or love to try new things will say, oh, I'll go ahead and try that. Well, those are like, I have time for 3 things. What are those 3, or what are those 5? And they can try those as well. So overall, I think pretty positive. I think an author is never fully satisfied with their book. And so I see a lot of places I want to expand and improve on, and things that I left out and all of that, which this annual update allows us to do that. So I get the electronic, and I'm more and more convinced that this is the way to go for particularly a topic like this.
Excellent. Now, as part of preparing for the book, you put a poll out for, hey, what are your top social media questions as church leaders and pastors? And you got a good list of them, so I'm curious how you synthesize them, and if you would tell us what one of those questions was and how'd you answer it.
Yeah. So I put that out. I actually was hoping I get more response from that, but we'll see how that goes with social media. You never know what's going to happen. I think that how I synthesized it was I really looked at what got the most hits and what seemed to be the biggest questions on people's minds, and then it was actually the last chapter that I wrote. So it came down to time and space for me. At a certain point, my editor was like, "You just need to get me something." Finish it. And so that's at the end of the day, that's what we did. I think one of the questions that constantly was asked was around pastoral connections to people, and should people have two profiles? And we'll just use, for example, should I have a pastor profile and a personal profile on Facebook? And I've always said in that case that I understand there may be times where you can have two identities online, maybe because of a particular lifestyle. Maybe if you're LGBT and that community you serve, there is an alignment in that, and you really kind of need to have some space. Or if there are political isolation issues, there certainly could be reasons. But for the most part, what I kind of encourage is that by having two personalities, we only compartmentalize even more, and that it gets us to this idea that there are things we can share online that we really want no one else to see. And I just think that that's a dangerous practice, and that we should fall into this idea that I say still, don't put anything online that you're not willing to say in person. And if you need to rant with people, online is not the place to do it. I just feel like it is too dangerous. There are too many ramifications that are unintended, and that you need to find core relationships that are personal or on the phone or whatever to kind of do that. So I encourage people to allow themselves to be fully themselves online by having one profile. The other thing it does is it allows people, I think now folks want a fully integrated pastor. When they see their pastors interacting, even when it's political or passionate disagreement, how we interact models how we hope people to be. And I think that is important. Even when we mess up and when people see us apologize online, that's important. When they see the rest of our lives going on, those are important elements of what it means to be a human being and to be a pastor. And so I think for me, that's how I answered it was, unless there are compelling circumstances, have one profile and be faithful and have integrity and appropriate in that profile, and don't compartmentalize.
Good thoughts. Thanks for the wisdom. Now, as a progressive mainline Christian, your approach to living out the faith is rather different than the vocal voices that are online in the evangelical and conservative world, where it's just broadcast, broadcast, broadcast. So what does it mean to have success in social media in a mainline and progressive side of perspective? And it wouldn't be fair to generalize, because that's part of the mix, is that in the mainline progressive world, it's not one solution for all. It's many voices and many diversity. But how do they frame it? It's not conversions. It's not size of audience. So how does a typical progressive approach that?
Oh, that's a very good question. And I think some of it would depend on the context in which we serve. So if I'm a local pastor, for instance, I would want to see the places where we're trying to create some space, healthy dialogue. And whether that's between congregation members or between congregation members and outside the church, but as a way to model what it means to be faithful people, especially right now in times of disagreement. For me personally, I blog a lot on a lot of controversial issues, and I know that more people watch the commenting and how I'm going to react than actually comment. And so I see some success in how much do I uh, actually live in this idea of not repaying evil with evil and truly loving my enemy. I wrote a blog post last week on gun violence on college campuses, and as my oldest child, as we're starting to look at colleges, and there were some pretty nasty things left on. Not surprising, gun talk always brings that out. But there were a couple of folks that said, "I disagree with you, but I really appreciate the way that you're holding this conversation." And I think that in itself is, can we really measure that? No, but I think that the impact of that by people who see it on all sides, I hope helps us rethink how we engage in these conversations. I also just wrote one on how we model for our children, and I think that's part of it as well. Is how do we model for the next generation of people? We like to blame the next generation for who they are when we actually help to form that. So, measurability, it's a little difficult. I think there are some of us who feel like the mainline progressive voice needs to be out there better. And then there are some of us who feel like we actually all need to engage in a better way. And I think that probably for me is where I speak out of mostly is how do we engage differently and without having to tear another person down in order to lift our own cause or our own position up. So, if I were to walk away from any conversation and say that's what they've done, that would be a success for me.
Okay, very good. That's very helpful to just point to a good reference or a social location, I guess, is how they say it in academia. Just what is that one thing you hold on to? And healthy conversation and modeling, I heard, were very valuable things, and they are very valuable things. And I think social media can feed our short attention span and our knee-jerk reaction rather than this healthy dialogue. So that's a good thing.
Correct. Yes.
Now, I'm a newbie to podcasting, so this is I've recorded 20 episodes of Social Media Church here. You're a podcast veteran, so I wanted to get one or two of your best tips, what you've learned in podcasting.
Well, I'm not necessarily a podcast veteran in the technology part. I mean, of how you put it together. I'm a podcast veteran and being on people's shows and talking and then making me sound smarter than I really am. So I'm really good at that. I think like most things, you point to it, attention span, right? Things that are too long, people don't listen to. And we can choose to fight it, or we can use that to the best of our ability. I think that overall is one of the best things. And then I love the idea that you'll edit down the audio, and then there's a raw version of this. I think people love to see that quick bite, but also what's behind the scenes. That really what's going on part, I think is a really a brilliant, fairly easy thing to do, just to connect it to, but here's what the conversation really looked like, and those who want to listen to that. So I think those are all parts of it that are good. And then I always tell folks, don't try too hard, because people know when we try too hard, you just kind of do what you're going to do, God will happen. It'll happen how God intends it to happen. So that's about all I can offer to you.
Okay, spoken like a true Presbyterian. A little bit of sovereignty there. Okay, one last question, and I don't know how much you want to unpack on this. You were part of an experiment called A Church Online that was going to start online. It's still kind of in that beta phase, and you've handed off the leadership to that. What have you learned in that journey, and where do you hope to see it go?
So we started, I don't know how long ago now, 6 or 7 months ago, with this idea about starting a church that happened to meet online. It was Presbyterian. And you interviewed me on this earlier back, so folks will probably click back to that somehow. But, it got out a little earlier than we wanted it to. And it kind of
sorry about that. That's social media. Since you put it out, accelerate it, right?
Exactly. I think we learned that, once I was at meetings and somebody kind of said, "Oh, you're starting this church," we were like, "Oh no!" So we tried to get ahead of it, but the train left the station and we weren't quite ready to drive it, really. And so before we could really come up with who we were, what we were doing, kind of like the commercial out there about trying to build a plane while it's up in the air. Um, it wasn't feeling right for me, and a few of us were talking about it, and I started to kind of get in conversations about some other things in my life and call, and so had a good talk with the leadership. And a few folks said, no, we're still up for it. And so that's kind of, we handed off. And what they've decided to do is to scale it back and to kind of bring it back into the living room. And it'll be interesting to see what happens. So they're going to start with about 12 to 15 people to just go back to doing a new church development, still with this idea that online is a significant portion of that. And then kind of build out a little slowly and a little more intentionally. What will be interesting is that when they put that in the group, they said to folks, we're going to do this, but we know that this is bigger than us. So here's your opportunity before this group gets closed down to begin other conversations. So what you've seen is 2 or 3 other groups say, okay, we're going to go here and do this. So I think in the next year, it'll be interesting to see what of those groups begin to get some legs of their own. So without ever even starting, whatever that means in the online world, things were birthed out of it, which I think is fascinating. And I feel a little bit bad that I am not going to be a part of leadership in it, but I think there's something about, being at that very beginning and that catalyst of it that is fine, and we'll see where it goes from here. So I'm excited about it. There's some good folks that are still involved, and then these new offshoots that no one would have ever expected. But this, again, gave people permission to think about it in a different way, and they're going for it.
Well, Bruce, you are more the pioneer than you give yourself credit for. So good to chat with you and hear what's going on in your mind and heart and spirit. And best of luck to you in your next chapters.
Great. Thanks for having me on. Cool.
All right. Thank you.